Joining us to discuss this are some voices we spoke to at the time, veteran broadcaster Adam Boulton and the BBC's former head of religion and ethics, Aaqil Ahmed. Thank you, gentlemen, both. Adam, I'll start with you. What did you think when you saw this apology tonight and also this inquiry that was handled by Deloitte?
Well, Rosanna, I mean, we're here in the News UK building, the Sun, obviously a colleague of ours, but we've got to say, because no one else would say it, what this apology does is vindicate the Sun's original story, because as you made clear there, Sun didn't identify the people involved. It simply said that there were worried parents who felt they'd made a legitimate complaint to the BBC, which wasn't taken seriously. And the BBC has now put its hand up following this investigation by Deloitte and said, yes, we got it wrong. So that, I think, vindicates the way, not only the Sun story, but the way in which the Sun did it. Obviously, there's more serious fallout in as much as Huw's wife now has identified him as the person concerned. As we understand it, he's still undergoing treatment for mental health issues. So there's no resolution, if you like, on Huw's case, and you know, everyone wishes him well. But what this shows effectively, I think, is that, you know, journalists are to a certain extent in the expose business. It's painful when it comes to someone close to us, someone we know, but nonetheless, it's an important thing to do if you have a potential victim in terms of a young person and his family unhappy that they are not getting appropriate response from the people who should be concerned.
Now, this was a line that you stuck with at the time, and yes, important clarification to make, we are in the same building, the same owners of the Sun newspaper. This isn't all about just, you know, pumping up the tires of that publication, but in terms of the way that it handled the reporting of this story, remind the viewers about where you stand on this in terms of what was in the public interest.
Well, I think if we in the news business constantly talk about the behaviour of politicians and other leading public figures, and the bar for what is, quotes, acceptable behaviour is not whether it's illegal or not. I mean, a lot of people in the public eye and out of the public eye have lost their jobs or had to resign for behaviour which falls well short of any sort of crime. And unfortunately, I think if you are like you or like me in the past, you are a public figure on screen, you have to accept that there's going to be a certain amount of scrutiny of your behaviour and people will reach their conclusions about it. As I say, the Sun followed due process by not identifying who it was, by not identifying even the gender of the people on the other side who alleged that there had been some contact with. But I do think it is a legitimate matter of public interest. I think it's something that we all, including the BBC, would do to other people. And therefore, if it comes to our own doorstep, I think we have to accept that that's part of the business.
Let's talk about the BBC then, Aaqil. Coming to you, you used to work at the corporation. Yeah. You were head of religion and ethics there. We spoke to you at the time of this story breaking last summer. What did you make of the apology from the BBC today? Was it slow to come or fast in your mind?
Well, obviously I'm speaking in a purely personal capacity. I mean, I think we need to remember that the apology is actually about the process, not about actually any particular allegations that have been made, because the police at the time did say that they didn't feel that any criminal activity had taken place.
Which was never an allegation made by the Sun. But I think it's always important to remind people of that as well. And of course, you know, so in terms of what the BBC have done today, I think is actually, it's right. At the time, they were right as well to say we're going to have an investigation. They've had that investigation. They brought in an outside body to do that, which I think was the right thing to do as well. And they've held a hand up and said the process wasn't particularly great. Now, it's also quite grey as well, because they did reach out. The problem being, did they reach out and do enough? Did they take it seriously at the time? The report is clearly saying that they didn't, and they could have done more, and that changes have been put in place now. So in a sense, what they've done is the right thing. They have done the right thing, and we have to understand as well there is actually another investigation going on into whether or not Huw has brought the BBC into disrepute, and I think it would be inappropriate probably to comment on that now because that report hasn't been published.
I mean, is it that they've done the right thing but they did it too late? So two of the key findings from the Deloitte investigation is one that when the parents originally complained to the BBC, it just wasn't escalated through the internal processes. It was just kind of lost in a milieu and they were kind of redirected. And a secondary part of this is that when there was investigations ongoing within the BBC, certain members, especially junior members of staff, felt that they couldn't come forward. They were too, not intimidated, but they just felt like they couldn't have that kind of arena. What do you say to that?
No, I understand that as well, actually. I think there's two separate things. And the one is actually the kind of like the labyrinth of kind of like trying to complain about something within an organisation, the scale and size of the BBC. And clearly this report says it wasn't correct. And I think on that one, they've held a hand up, and I think changes have been made. The second point, I think that's a big industry-wide problem about the power that individuals have. And we've seen it in, not just with the BBC, we've seen it with allegations made about people at ITV, Channel 4, other kind of broadcasters, or associated with other kind of broadcasters. And I think there's a real issue that needs to be resolved. Is it as bad as it probably used to be? Probably not. But I think any inappropriate activity where you have somebody in a position of power and people don't feel that they can actually complain about that, that's no workforce that anybody wants to have.
I mean, I think the sad thing is this could have been sorted out, as it were, in-house, had the BBC picked up the complaint. Now, a lot of complaints are made. It's understandable that they didn't, but they didn't have the procedures in place. But what happened was that there was then the Sun story, and I have to say I was absolutely astonished. I was on the BBC on Newsnight talking about this, and a BBC reporter came in and said, we've got further allegations from inside the building. And so it was clearly an issue. I mean, we don't know the rights and wrongs of it, but it was clearly an issue within the BBC that the BBC was unaware of it until it appeared on the front page of the Sun.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a size and scale thing, Aaqil, but also from the point of view of the ethics, you know, when you're managing ethics in a corporation of this size and you draw up handbooks and guidelines and things like this, I mean, do you account for a situation like this?
You do. There are all sorts of things that you have to account for. I mean, we're all right. The scale of this is off the charts, but in terms of the amount of complaints that come in, you don't. Hindsight's lovely, isn't it? With hindsight, you think, oh, if they'd done this and done this and done this. They tried to contact somebody. If somebody doesn't reply to that contact, in hindsight, it looks like they should have done more. But at the time, if someone's not getting back to you, having made serious allegations, at the time, unsubstantiated serious allegations, then you don't, at the time, what do you do? You think that actually this isn't as bad as it is. Now, when the article comes out, at that point, that's when you'd imagine things escalate. And things did, to be fair, escalated a little within the BBC. So actually, the question really is actually, were the processes in place before the article came in place? Were they good and proper? Well, we clearly know they're not, and they weren't. And that's the change that has had to come in. But at the time, and I can say this as somebody who's managed lots of teams, I've worked with Huw actually in the past as well, you get all sorts of allegations coming in, and actually most of them are not necessarily true. Now on this one, actually there's been proved that there are issues to be looked at, but you don't necessarily always know that when a complaint comes in.
Adam, just before we finish, from your professional kind of perspective as a broadcaster, do you think there is any way back for Huw Edwards?
I think the general assumption which comes from within the BBC and from within the industry is that Huw is still undergoing medical treatment for some sort of mental condition, that this means that he can't work, although he, as far as we understand, remains on the payroll. So I don't know. I haven't spoken to Huw or his family since this started, but I think the general assumption is no, he's not coming back. And indeed, I believe that because we've got an election on top of us, the BBC is already making plans for other presenters to do their election coverage.
Look, gentlemen, it's been great having you in to discuss this evening. Adam Boulton, Aaqil Ahmed, thank you.